All right, we're going to start into the book of Genesis, chapter 1 today. And we're going to start, first of all, with Genesis chapters 1 through 11. If you can always remember, Genesis 1 through 11 are very much connected. I would love to teach an entire semester on just the book of Genesis. There's so much, and obviously you can get into creation science, which is very interesting to me, and I'm sure probably is to most of you. You just don't like to do all the assignments in the class, right? But just reading it, oh my goodness, very interesting. You know, the more I study creation, the more I study the book of Genesis, the more I love the topic, and the more I realize how amazing our God is in what He created and the complexity. And yet the simplicity on the other hand, but very much the complexity of what God did in creating the world. And then He continues. We're not deists where we believe that God just started it and let it go. God continues to maintain and to supervise and to raise up and destroy nations. He's done that throughout the history of the world. But all of it is to accomplish His will. And so I always just love to think that as He's bringing up one nation, He's preparing another nation that has rejected Him. He's preparing them to be destroyed. And in this nation He's raising up, as wicked as they are, He's even at the same time preparing another nation to destroy that nation. He's always in control. God is not mocked. That's for sure. So anyway, I just love to think of how amazing God is. So Genesis chapters 1 through 11 are very much what I'm going to call in for our outline, the general history of the world. There's a lot of people that have stepped out and tried to say, what is the history of the world? And of course, you cannot find the history of the world apart from the Bible. Okay? I need to know who in history was there at the Big Bang, if you believe the Big Bang theory. Okay? Nobody. They don't try to say about. What about, however, I don't know all their numbers, when the different ages of their theory, who was there 50 million or 250 million, I don't know what it matters. A few million years is not that much when you're considering their scope of things. Who was there to see that? Well, I know somebody who claims to have been there. And there's a lot of evidence that he was there. Okay, I'm saying that facetiously. Because obviously, anyway, so there's all the evidence in the world, no pun intended. All the evidence in the world says that he was there. So we're going to take his account of what he said happened. Okay, so it's amazing. Our God is truly amazing. All right, so Genesis 1 through 11 is the general history. And then, of course, in chapter 12, we're going to see the patriarchal history of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Typically, we would include him as well in that. Okay, so Genesis 1 through 11, the general history. We're going to start with this. Let me just throw out some things at you. I think it's very interesting. There's three important men in this stage: Adam, Enoch, and Noah. Genesis 1 through 11. There's four important events: the creation, the fall, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. Okay, so this era of history is the only one which describes God as resting from His work. There's nowhere else in the Bible, actually, that we find God resting. I know Jesus rested and so on, but we don't find God resting except in Genesis chapter 1. He rested from His work, and of course, that wasn't because He was tired. Mr. Fly likes to ask this question. Why did God rest from His great work? You're not allowed to say if you know what Mr. Fly says. Why did He rest, somebody? We know it wasn't because He was tired. Anybody? All right, Dustin, do you remember? You don't remember? Oh, I thought you had it.
He's only blessed, he always asks that question.
Sure, that's his favorite question. Why did he rest? Because he was finished. He was finished. And I like to think he's probably saying he finished a day early. Come on in. Quickly. That'll work. So he was finished. That's why he rested from his work, because he was done. He had nothing else. I know. He was also setting us an example. This era of history gives us the first human to be created and the first human to be born. Cain shows us the first man to die and the first man not to die. Right? There's a number of people in the Bible who did not die. By the way, Jesus is not one of them. Okay, so anyway, but it shows us the first one to die and the first one not to die. It gives us the glory of God in creation and the grace of God in salvation, and lots of other great things about this section. So I just thought I'd throw that out to you. Let's get to our first main point, the creation of all things. The creation of all things. Let me just point out, as we think about the creation, and I'm going to try not to get too involved in creation science, but I just think there's a lot of things that we need to at least touch on. And I could just go for a long time on these kinds of things. I know you could as well. Let me ask you this question, and I want you to note this in your outline here somewhere as underneath the creation of all things. What was God doing before he created all things? What was God doing before he created all things? I mean, we have a hard time understanding, not hard time, it's impossible for us to understand, to comprehend who God is. So, but still, the Bible does give us some insight on what God was doing before he created. Now, we have this idea that, God sits in heaven somewhere, and one day he came up with this grand plan that he's going to create the world and all of the things that we know. I mean, that's, of course, not how it happened. God has always planned throughout eternity past. This plan has been a part of God's plan. The work on earth has been a part of God's plan. So what was God doing before he created the world? What are some things that we can definitely say from the Bible? Any ideas? He created angels. Probably did that. That's one of the things that I have. Let's actually mention that. He was creating angels and stars. Job chapter 38 verse 4 says, God, of course, asking Job to put the whole, all of Job's problems in perspective. God said, Job, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. That's Job 38:4. And in verse 7 he says, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. That sons of God is a reference to the angels shouting for joy, the praising God. So he was creating the angels and the stars. Probably, there's a lot of people think that the angels are created on the same day as the stars, or maybe the angels are created maybe on the first day of creation. But anyway, creating the angels, very likely, possibly right before creation or right at creation. Anybody else? Okay, I have 6 things. Okay, the Bible gives us 6 things. Another thing he was doing, he was having fellowship with his son. He was having fellowship with his son. You say, yeah, I thought you were talking an actual work. Well, the Bible tells us what he was doing. In the book of Proverbs chapter 8, verse number 22. I'll read a few verses here. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way. Now, this is a reference to wisdom. This whole chapter, and of course the whole book, but especially this chapter, is wisdom actually speaking. Okay, so wisdom is a person in this chapter. And wisdom says, the Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way. Before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning wherever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water, that's before the creation, before the mountains, before the hills. While as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust of the world, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. This is a reference to wisdom. Some believe it's a reference to Christ. Anyway, that's one of the passages. Proverbs 8:22. John 17 also says this, actually in reference specifically to Christ. John 17, here's the prayer of Christ, the intercessory prayer of Christ. And so Jesus is praying for his disciples, and he prays that they'll also have fellowship with the Father. Verse 5, And now, O Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. So that's something God was doing before the earth was created. He was fellowshipping with his Son. John 17:24 also says, Father, I will that they also whom thou hast given me be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory which thou hast given me. For thou lovedst me before the foundation of the world. We can take that figuratively and say, oh yeah, he's saying a long, long time. No. Take it literally. Before the world was created, before the foundation of the world were laid, Jesus and the Father were, they loved one another. They fellowshiped with one another. So that's another thing God was doing, was having fellowship with his Son. What else? Okay, he was choosing the elect. He was choosing the elect. Ephesians 1:4 says, according as he hath chosen us in him before the foundation of the world. 2 Timothy 1:9 says, who hath saved us and called us with an holy calling, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace, which was given us in Christ Jesus before the world began. So you see, anytime that phrase is used, it's in reference to something that God did before the world. And you can talk about this election all you want, but the bottom line is God planned it. You can talk about who he's electing, the Jews or the church or the saints and so on. Next, he was also planning for a church. Let me give you a little hint here on something I believe. I believe that God intended for Christ to return back to the earth soon after he left and ascended to heaven. I believe Paul expected the return of Christ because I think that was God's original intent. However, it didn't surprise God when the Jews rejected Christ and he extended the church age for at least almost 2,000 years now. It didn't surprise God in any way because he knew that the Jews would reject him, and so he planned for the church age before the world ever started. Look at this, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 8. Unto me, who am less than the least of all saints, is this grace given that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, to make all men see what is the fellowship of the mystery. What mystery? Well, in the context, it's talking about the church. The fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the ages hath been hidden in God, who created all things by Jesus Christ. Ephesians 3, 8, and 9. So he had planned for the church before the world was started. What else? He was also preparing for a kingdom before the world was started. Matthew 25:34. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Isn't that something? God planned all of this before the world ever started. And then lastly, God was planning for a Savior. 1 Peter 1, 18, 19, 18 through 20. I won't read the whole passage, but I'll pick it out. Who verily was foreordained. He's talking about Christ, the Lamb without blemish and without spot. Who verily was foreordained before the foundation of the world. It was known throughout the ages of our history, before the history of the world started, Jesus Christ would be the Savior. Revelation 13:8 says, all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of the life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. In the mind of God, Jesus was slain before the world ever was started. It was preordained. It was known. So when we talk about predestination or preordained or things like that, we're talking about before the world ever started, in the mind of God, he knew what would happen. And the entire plan of history is laid out, of our history. And here we sit day by day, hour by hour, and we say, oh, that's terrible. This accident happened. And God, it's all part of his plan all along. There's nothing surprising to him. That's comforting to me, to know that God was doing this before the world ever began. Okay, now let's talk about the days of creation. The days of creation. What did God do? Of course, let me give you some things that are very commonly known. First, on the first day, he created light. Light is an amazing, amazing thing. I keep hearing, that light, the speed of light and so on. And I understand that the speed of light actually changes when you go out into space. Or I don't understand all of it. But anyway, so I just think it's interesting. God knows all of that. And he created all of this. The Bible calls God the Father of lights. The Father of lights. It's no. Well, maybe it's a pun on words, but it's not an accident that the Bible says that men who are sinners love darkness rather than light. They love darkness. Boy, I like bright lights, don't you? I don't mean like glitzy, like I don't like that. I'm saying bright. I don't like things dark. I don't like to have to look out about and barely can see anybody. But men love darkness. Sinners love darkness, and God's the Father of lights. Light's an amazing thing that God created to shine on the whole world. It's when we get to heaven someday, the Bible says that Jesus is the light of heaven. So there's something special, and I don't understand the electrical component. I don't understand all that. But I do know that there's something very special about light, and especially as God created it. On the second day, he separated the waters. The water was in two forms, regular land-based water and atmospheric water. And so he created both of those and divided them. Third, he created plant life. On the third day, plant life. And for probably a couple million years, the plants just continued to exist, according to the day-age theory, while the sun was getting ready to be evolved. Right? So, plant life. Green vegetation, many, many, many flowers. Of course, most of you come from out of state. So you travel, and so you've seen lots of variety of things. But here in the Midwest, it's just kind of flat and boring and fields, But boy, you'll see a lot of, right? But you go to other places, you'll see unbelievable flowers and all kinds of growth that God made special. The variety is just unbelievable. And that's God. That's our God. The creation of plant life. Fourth, he created the sun, the moon, and the stars that fourth day of creation. Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 through 19, I haven't mentioned to this point. I should, at least some point along here, is that when God finished creating on a day, he always called it good. Verse 19, in the evening, morning, or the fourth day, verse before it, the phrase before that, and God saw that it was good. Every one of these things, when God made something, it was good. It was good. Good is God, really. It's God. That's who He is. There's nothing that He does that's not good. So when we see things in our lives that we call bad, you say, well, why would God He let it happen, but He didn't plan. He didn't want that to happen to a person. He didn't want them to experience suffering or sorrow. But everything He creates is good. Why did God create the sun, the moon, and the stars? Let me give you 3 functions of the bodies that God put in the heavens. 3 functions of the bodies of light. Well, before I get to functions, I'm thinking, how far away are those stars? Oh, it's impossible to even comprehend. Go to the Creation Museum, right? That'll help you get some understanding of how far away things are. I heard somewhere, if the distance from here to the sun, which is, they say, 93 million miles, which I have no idea how they measure that. Stick a measuring tape a long ways away. 93. If you counted the width of a thickness of a piece of paper. All right, here we go. This thick is 93 million miles. And you went from here, the same 93 million miles, you went from here to the nearest star, after the sun, you would have 71 feet high, a 71 foot high stack of paper. And then it just goes beyond, it's beyond ridiculous after that. If you go the width of the Milky Way galaxy, it's like 210 million miles of paper. It's ridiculous. It's impossible for us to even comprehend. Okay, that's who our God is, and to think that He created that by a big bang. Yeah, I guess so. On the 4th day of creation, there was a big bang. Boom! Everything went to the far ends of the universe and beyond. So, why did He make those lights? To fluster scientists and to amaze us. Oh, I like to, every so often I'll find some video that NASA or somebody, which they usually have to make them, just with computer models. But to see how far away things are, how amazing things are. Yes?
Time measurement.
Okay, anything else? That's correct. I have a different name for it.
For signs, for seasons, for days, and for years, so I guess that's the same thing. But
Sure. Signs, seasons, days, and years. And then the third one is very obvious. Light. To give light. So let's mention these. First, as signs. As signs. Now, what's a sign for? Now, I know it's a sign that something is going to happen. It's always, they're given as signs, and they let man see that something's about to happen.
It can be an indication or a warning.
Okay? So when you see a sign, it's indicating that something's getting close, or a warning, beware. Well, in this case, it's very true. Psalm 8:3 says, "When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained." So they're signs for us to remember who God is and how great God is, to remind us of His creation. Oh, there's no question. They're signs for us to remember these things about God. Romans 1:19, "For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made." So the creation is a sign to all men that there's a creator. And any honest scientist can't believe in evolution once they come to face that fact. Next, they also are given as seasons. A calendar. How is a calendar? Of course, our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, is not, hasn't been used forever. So they used other calendars for that. How did they know that? They figured it out by the stars. For thousands of years, And I say that facetiously. The earth is 6,000 years old or a little bit more. All of the life of the earth, people have used calendars. 360 days was very normal. The Babylonians used calendars. The Egyptians, the most ancient Egyptians had calendars. They were a little bit different, not as exact as ours, but they'd always get back on track and make it up through the use of reckoning the stars and knowing the constellations and so on. I am not an astronomer. Yes, I almost call an astrologer. I'm definitely not an astrologer. So they function as a calendar, dividing seasons, days, years, and you can accurately plan your work. So as seasons, and then third as lights. As lights. Why did God create light on the first day and then the sun, moon, and stars on the fourth day? Any thoughts on that? I don't really have an answer for it other than I've thought that maybe God was wanted to show that His light, His own radiating light, was all that was needed. But then He also put in place for the beauty of the earth and for signs and seasons, the sun and the moon and the stars. What are some significant effects of the moon? Tides? Anything else? That's the main thing. But huge. I mean, that's very, very important. And so, of course, we can plan on that. We know when these things are going to happen. I don't, but people do. All right, the fifth day. Creation of fish and fowl. Fish and fowl. God made every kind of organism that floats around in the ocean, but He also made the biggest of creatures. Unbelievable size. What is it? A blue sperm whale, I think it is. Can grow to 110 feet long and weigh about 150 tons. So, of course, it's got a big playground to play in too. So, oh my goodness! I've read somewhere that its heart is the size of an elephant, and its largest vein running from the front to the back of the fish is big enough. Blood vein is big enough that a grown man could swim through it. So, huge creatures. I like to tell my junior church that sometimes, and they're yeah, right. He was doing laps. He had lots of butterflies in his stomach too, I'll bet, doing the butterfly. All right, the sixth day, creation of land creatures and man. Notice that God especially acted on creating man. He didn't just speak it, He acted upon it. Let us make man. Let us not create out of nothing man. Let us make or form man in our image, verse 26, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air. When God created man, He didn't make him like the plants. The plants are unconscious, living creatures, organisms. Very good. That'll work. But they're unconscious. He didn't create man like the animals. The animals are conscious, but they're not aware of God. They're not aware of their maker in the sense that we are. By the way, I do believe that all animals and all plants have a relation to their maker. I believe God made them that way. And I could give you lots of examples. But so God didn't make man like the animals who are conscious, breathing, but not aware of their maker. He made man self-conscious and God-conscious. And so that's the big difference in when God created man from the animals. And only fool men who deny God, the Bible gives me the right to call them a fool, they're the only ones who would go back and say, we're just like these animals. They're trying to take away their responsibility to their Maker and not feel that presence of guilt. Let us make man. This is the first strong evidence of the Trinity in the Old Testament. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. So man was created in God's image. There's many references after this to the Trinity. Listen to this, Isaiah 48:16. Come ye near unto me, hear ye this. I have not spoken in secret from the beginning, from the time that it was, there am I. From the time of the beginning, there am I. And now the Lord God and his Spirit hath sent me. So God says in Isaiah 48:16, I, the Trinity, I've always been there, and it wasn't a secret. From the beginning, I showed you that I was a Trinity. And sure enough, we read about this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. So I love to see that God made man in his image. Let me note down some things for you concerning the man. And this is so that I don't have to go through every detail of the next several chapters. I don't have time. I would love to. But note several things about this creation of man. We know that he was made in the image of God. Man has the highest kind of life. Have there been cavemen? Yes, there have been cavemen. But that's not the way God made men. Okay? That's not the way God made men. Man was given the highest kind of life. Something just hit me this morning as I'm reading through the Bible here, this section. I'd never thought of this before. It's brand new. Hot off the press. What happened when Adam and Eve sinned? What did they do? First thing they did, they hid themselves, yes. And then what did they do?
Make garments.
They made, not garments, yes, kind of garments. With what? What did they do with the fig leaves? They sewed them. I've never thought of that before. They knew how, they figured out immediately how to sew something together. Right? I don't know, I just never, they found a quill, maybe they've had their pet porcupine, said, come here. And whatever they did, they sewed fig leaves together. Okay, they weren't cavemen, they weren't dummies. They figured things out immediately and they were very smart. Obviously, okay, smarter than any of us. How's that? Smarter than any of us. All right, so they were made in the image of God. They had the highest kind of life. We have a creature who can not only eat of Eden's food, but would also at the same moment glance towards heaven and thank their Creator and speak to their Creator. I don't know how long they were in the Garden of Eden as sinless people, but I believe it was probably for some time. That's my opinion. I don't really have a reason to say that other than, but I do think when they fellowshiped with God every day, I believe God talked to them about how to take care of the earth that they were on. Here's how you build a house. Not a house, what we think of as a house, but you build yourself a dwelling place. Keep your stuff in here at night. You can sleep here. Put this food together. If you mix this and this, it's real good. I really believe that God wanted them, He didn't just say, they didn't sleep out under the tree every night. Maybe they did and they enjoyed it, but whatever. They didn't live like cavemen. God, I'm sure, showed them and taught them how to make their life comfortable. He wanted them to be the happiest creatures anywhere. So, the best food, all natural, gluten-free, and so on. Organic. There you go. It was all organic. So anyway, another thing that the man was to do, he was to subdue the earth and fill it. Chapter 1, verse 28, God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing tree on the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree. To you it shall be for meat. Oh, I'm sorry, I read the wrong verse. God blessed them, God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So they were supposed to subdue the earth. And it was, everything in creation is for the man, for the human, not the other way around. So, anyway, so we know what we believe on that. We're in charge. And that's the way it's supposed to be, because we're the only ones who are supposed to think like God thinks towards his creation. Third, he was encouraged to enjoy the trees and the fruits around the garden. He's encouraged to enjoy all creation, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, of course. But he's supposed to enjoy everything in creation. Okay, I'm sure there obviously was no eating meat. So I feel sorry for Adam there. That he didn't get to eat, a good steak or pork chop or whatever. I'm trying to think of something with his ribs, he had to give up a rib. So, to his wife of all things. Unbelievable. So, the day my wife takes a rib off me, off my plate. Okay, anyway. But he was encouraged to enjoy everything in creation. Okay, so, boy, just from all the fruits, and I don't know what kind of fruits, we always think of the common ones. I'm sure there were many things that he had access to that we don't even have anymore. We don't even know what it is anymore. But in a garden that God made, I'm sure every single kind of fruit that you can imagine was in there. It's God's garden. And so he put there for that man, as great as he created the world, he put all of the best things in the world in one place for Adam and Eve. Right? All they had to do is go right outside or right there where they lived, and they had access to everything, the best of everything in the whole world. Wouldn't that be awesome? So anyway, every kind of thing you can imagine to eat. He wanted Adam to enjoy everything. Fourth, of course, he was forbidden to partake of one tree. One tree. This tree, God put there as a what? Why did God put it there? Yes, he put it there as a test. Isn't it something? Edmund had a birthday yesterday, so it made me think of this again. If I had a whole bunch of gifts for my son, and then I had one thing there, and I said, look, you can have all of these other things, don't touch this one thing. And I just left it sitting out there, purposely. That one, I guarantee you, whatever it would be, if it was a baby infant toy, he'd want to touch it. Why? Just because that's our nature. Don't touch that one thing. Oh man, I gotta see what that feels like, or I gotta pick it up. God put this out there as a test for Adam and Eve. Another thing concerning the man, he was to name all the animals. He was to name all the animals. Chapter 2, verse 19 says, and out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. Adam gave names to all cattle and to the fowl of the air and to every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not found a help meet for him. So, this job was a twofold assignment. One was to get Adam to exercise his ability, his intellect, to name animals. And this isn't just, off the top of his head, he said, what am I going to call this thing? He organized them by families, I believe. He organized them by families. This is, very plain. This is the dog family. Okay, and there's lots and lots of animals that we wouldn't call dogs today that were part of that family. That we don't outright call them dogs, but they're part of that family. This is something else, family. Okay, and so Adam exercised his intellect there. I believe God did that on purpose. And then the second purpose was, what? Why did he have him name the animals? Yes?
To realize that there's two of everyone.
To get him to realize that he was lonely. I have a few lonely gentlemen in here. I'm kidding. You should go out and try to name the animals, folks. David?
How do you think he named the sea animals? How do you think the Lord brought the lion?
I'm sorry?
The sea animals?
I think he just took them to edge of water and they all swam up.
We're taking a trip to the beach, Adam. Come on.
Right. I don't know. That's a great question. Okay, when I was a kid, and for years I've always thought, Adam sat down and about an hour or two later he was done.
Yeah.
Oh, no. So I don't know, but whatever it was, it would have taken weeks, I would imagine. A long time, which to me is another reason, a good reason why he had been here for a while. He was there for longer than a day or two, and all of a sudden here comes this woman walking up to him, and then 2 days later he got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. It's not like, I don't think it's like that. Rick, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's interesting how, I've noticed recently that science stuff, they're always trying to lump us with animals.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are, this kind of animal.
Sure.
Or whatever. And I saw this thing was which animals killed most people, and man was lumped in with that statistic.
Yeah.
So they're always trying to put us down there when God created us higher than that.
Yep, good point. Trevor?
Well, along with naming the animals, I guess one thing to remember is that probably at that time there were just two of every kind. I mean, we didn't have all the breeds that we have now.
Sure.
And all that came over time.
Sure. But even then...
There probably were lots of animals that we don't even know about today.
Sure. Even then, there were lots of animals. I totally agree with what you're saying, that there were many different breeds. But if it's... I don't know, I've not looked at this recently as far as how many thousands of actual families there are, or, whatever. We usually take Noah's Ark and we kind of figure out how many animals would have fit on that boat and so on. But, my point. But still, it would have taken, even for several thousand kinds of animals, it would have taken a long time planning and trying to understand the family lines and so on like that. I think that would have been taken more time than just, sitting down and boom, 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 done. Let's move on to our next job. Time to eat some more fruit. So, okay, any questions on that? Lots of thoughts, ringing through our heads, I'm sure. And then, so the next thing for the man is that he was given a wife. He realized his need. I'm not trying to be silly here, but every man needs a wife. Whatsoever Adam called the creature, he gave the name. But for Adam, verse 20, there was not found a help meet for him. So it wasn't just that he needed a wife. God puts within a man a need for a wife, but also for the work. He needed somebody to help him. And so God gave him not only a wife, but a helper as well. It's one person. It's the same thing, but it's very much together. So he was given a wife. This is the first of the 3 great institutions given by God to man. And so from the very beginning, God established that a man and his helpmeet, his counterpart, was a woman taken from the man. Now let's think about this a little bit. God put Adam to sleep. And by the way, before I get to that, Adam needed a wife, as I mentioned. And I'm sure he sat there often saying, Lord, God, help me. I'm supposed to have, they all have a second one and I don't. This isn't fair. Why did God wait? Why did God wait? God just made everything, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. But then he only created 1. Why did God create the woman later instead of just right away making a man and a woman? I don't really have an answer for it, but I think there's probably a good reason for it.
Maybe to force Adam to rely on God instead of just...
Sure, first time. I just had a thought here. When he made the man, what did he say? God created man. God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. But it wasn't even finished yet, because he hadn't made the woman yet. But it was very good, wasn't it? Yeah. I knew somebody would think of that. Actually, in verse 27, it says, male and female created he them. So we don't know if he said it was very good until after he created the male and the female, or at this point when he had only made the male. Chapter 2 is how God created everything. Created the man and the woman, I should say, not everything. How God created the man and the woman. So, anyway, yes?
Maybe you waited so that he would appreciate it.
Oh. Ulterior motive. I just think that there's something to it why God created the man, and then he awakened Adam's senses to realize I need a female. I'm a male. I need a female. And so then God made someone for him from his side, from his own rib. So God was showing Adam that the woman comes from him. So that it's a lot different than just, 2 animals. Obviously, animals aren't faithful to their spouses, not most of them. Right? So you have, anyway, so they're not faithful. God made the man, and he took the woman from the man so that they would see that they're the only 2 for each other. Isn't that special? Okay. All right. I thought I had something else I was going to mention. I guess not. All right, I mentioned this is the first of 3 great institutions. The family, the marriage and the family. By the way, pushing this idea of homosexual marriage today in our country. Everybody's pushing it now. I'm telling you, the sports figures are pushing this thing. North Carolina passed that law barring men from going into a women's bathroom. And the NBA basketball says we're not going to have our all-star game in the state of North Carolina because of that. And now the NCAA, college basketball, and the finals games in basketball and soccer and other things, they're pulling their finals games out of North Carolina because they don't allow men to go into women's bathrooms. So instead of doing that, we're going to go to different states, and we're also going to go to China and play some of our games over there to show that we're inclusive with China. Yeah, the Chinese, who they go around, and if a woman has more than 2 children, they abort, they take the child, even if they're born, they take them and kill them. Oh, the Chinese who don't allow religious freedom of any kind. Oh yeah, we side with them, but not with North Carolina because they don't allow a pervert to go into a bathroom. Okay, so I mean, that's just one. That's just the NBA and the NCAA. That's two groups. So, what is that ultimately? Oh, you had a point to make. Sorry, you had.
At Walgreens, I saw they had these cards, like wedding congratulations cards. It said one was Mr. and Mr. and then it was Mrs. and Mrs.
Oh. Oh. You didn't have to tell me that. What is that ultimately? Okay, in light of what we're saying, what we're talking about here in creation here, what is that whole agenda ultimately an agenda about?
Total rejection of God's plan.
Absolutely. It's a rejection of God. It's attacking God's way of doing things. It's an attack on God. There's no question about it. Okay? There's no question about it. Just because they're nice, I'm getting the slimy feeling. Just because they're nice, just because they're friendly, just because they're good business people, which some of them are, doesn't mean that they can't attack God's plan, and they do, and they are. All right, so I keep getting sidetracked. That's the first of the three greatest. What's the second and the third? The government. In Genesis chapter 9, God established human government in Genesis 9 as an institution that he would use throughout the course of the world. And so that's something that we should respect just by the nature of it that God started it. Marriage, the family, human government, and then the third main institution is the church. Now there's also, I say that applies to us more, but there's also God's way of working with the Jews. But even that was through a human government, I think, as far as kingdoms and so on like that. But then the church, Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus founded the church upon Peter. No. Nice. Glad you caught that. All right, that's the 6 days of creation. Then the seventh day, God rested. At this seventh day of creation, the first law of thermodynamics was in full effect. What is it? Nobody remember? Oh, yes.
Everything tends to entropy.
Yeah, but there's more to it at the beginning. Basically, there's nothing new created or created, but that it can only be changed from one form to another. That's the gist of it. Nothing new created. Nothing. And so when scientists talk about creating something new, they'll never do it, number one. And if they say they did it, they're a liar. That's my belief. God created everything, and in the end of Genesis chapter 1, he said it was very good. That means complete. That means perfect. And how can you improve on something that's perfect? Okay? And when we're talking God perfect, we're not talking me perfect, which I'm pretty close. No, I'm kidding. We're talking God perfect. That cannot be improved upon. So the seventh day of creation, I believe, is this beginning of God. Why did God rest on the seventh day? We said it's because he was finished, of course. He was finished working. But another reason he rested, a more accurate biblical reason. Yes?
To establish a pattern for us.
To establish a pattern for us. You work 6 days, and the seventh day is a day of rest. Okay, so we have a day of worship that we exercise. That's kind of become the thing to do, to worship God on that seventh day. But I'm not going to go into the whole Sabbath thing here at this point. But God definitely established the seventh day as a day of rest. And in Exodus chapter 20 or 21, when he instituted what commandment is it? I almost said the seventh. That's not right. The fourth. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. At that point, he established for the Jews a lot of stipulations on how they were to observe that Sabbath day of rest. So I believe that was for the Jews. But anyway, so we now worship God on Sunday and practice the Lord's Supper. When we do it on Sunday. We do these things in response to the to the New Testament church. All right, so Genesis 1 and 2 is about the creation of all things. We find that as our part of our general history. Next, let's move on then. Actually, I'm not going to move on, but I'll just start it here. The corruption of all things. Genesis chapters 3 through 5. Genesis chapters 3 through 5. Between the second and third chapter of Genesis, Moses tells us that the world went from being perfect to there's a point where there's a serpent who is in the image, who is taken over by Satan. Now, between Genesis chapter 2 and 3, there's no indication of where that serpent came from. There's nothing there that says what happened, why there's a devil who came into a serpent. It doesn't say anything about the devil. We just see here all of a sudden, now the serpent was more subtle, and so here comes the serpent. Now we know from later passages that this is the devil, but the passage doesn't even say that it was the devil. It says it was the serpent. Now we know from other passages that this serpent is the devil. And there's 2 chapters in the Bible that tell us what happened between chapter 2 and chapter 3. What are those 2 chapters in the Bible? It's Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Know those 2 chapters, Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Listen, if it wasn't for that, I think people would still figure out that the serpent is the devil, because there's many, many passages that refer to the devil as a serpent. Listen to this, Revelation 20, verse 2. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan. Revelation 12:9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. Matthew 23:33, Jesus called the Pharisees, ye serpents, ye generations of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? So Satan and the devil and hell are clearly related to the serpent in that verse. Listen to this verse, Psalm 58 verse 4. Their poison is like the poison of the serpent. They are like the deaf adder that stoppeth her ear. On and on. So the serpent here is clearly the devil. But Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28 tell us that the devil fought against God and was defeated and then kicked out of heaven, rejected from heaven, and cast down to earth. And when he came to the earth, he said, I'm going to ruin what God created. Now, I wish he wouldn't have sent him here, but God had his plan, from our side, we say, man, why did he come here? Well, God's plan was for Satan to come here and to tempt Adam and Eve. But the temptation was already there. The mode of the temptation, the method, was already there in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Satan used that to get a wedge between man and God. All right, so we see that serpent is the devil. We'll see, of course, in our next class period then, what the devil does to get the first perfect couple. You thought you were the perfect couple. They were the first perfect couple to mess up their lives and mess up the entire world. All right, you're dismissed.